Whenever you guys want to start.
Thank you very much for bringing us in to consult on the various cases you have in front of us. We are Westminster College Team B. My name is Ryan Reese. I'm a recent graduate from Westminster College with my degree in economics, and I've lived in Utah for the past 10 years.
My name is Francesca Scopello. I was born and raised in Italy. I'm a senior at Westminster College studying finance.
My name is Cole Spooner. I was born and raised in Southern California. I'm a senior here at Westminster College with the finance and accounting major, graduating in the year 2020.
My name is Tim Batty. I'm from Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and I'm a senior finance major at Westminster. So we've been brought in to advise you all at Express Auto on a couple different transactions that have been put on the table. We'll start by giving an introduction of the firm. We'll then move on to an analysis of the scenarios that were presented, go over the company's historical performance, go over the current market climate, go over the forecast assumptions, present our analysis, and finally give our valuation and advice. So first, it's important to note that we are currently operating in the year 2012. We are provided historical financials for the years prior to 2012 and given forecasts for the years after. Express Auto is a franchise auto dealership. This means that they function as a direct agent of a manufacturer or franchisor. In this case, our franchisor is a company called Fontaine Motors. We operate in the United States and Europe and are owned by the Thompson family. The Thompson family is comprised of Todd, Shauna, and Sarah, all three of which inherited their ownership stakes from John Thompson, who recently passed away. Sarah was the wife of John and inherited a 50% ownership stake, while Todd and Shauna was his children, and they inherited a 25% stake each. Todd was very involved in the business ever since he graduated college, and he's cultivated meaningful relationships with management in both the EU and US. Sarah and Shauna, however, are not interested in remaining with the business and are looking to liquidate their ownership stakes as soon as possible to fund a business venture in Paris. So now we'll take a look at Fontaine Motors. Based on our analysis, we found them to manufacture quality, high-performance vehicles. We found them to be targeting affordable vehicles for the upper class, and we found them to be most similar to a company such as BMW. So now we'll look into the scenarios that were presented to us. First scenario was from a private equity firm called Hout Partners NYC. They were bidding for the entire entity, both our US and EU operations, and it was a bid of $173 million. The second offer was from a company called Eurocar. They're a European-based company, and we're bidding exclusively for our European operations. They're hoping to save $1.5 million based on synergies, and they bid $75 million for our European operations.
I'm going to start by breaking down our recommendation for you all and the offers presented to Express Auto. The best offer on the table is Eurocar's offer of $75 million of the European operations. These are backed by the pessimistic European outlook in the industry and slow growth across the board, as well as languishing European operations, which include stagnant net sales and above or below net income. Here you can see the historical forecasted sales for both the EU and US operation. 1.5% is the growth from 2010 to 2011 for the EU specifically. The negative 52% is including up until the 2012 year for the EU operation. The US operations have been growing a lot more in size and in growth over the next couple of years forecasted than the EU is expected to. Here's the historical and forecasted net income for both operations. As you can see, the similar trend, European operations are lagging and US operations are taking the dominant position of the company in terms of returns on the dealership. Inventories for the US dropped as management feels lagging growth in the EU and less sales over the next couple of years. The previous years of financials have shown negative growth in sales as well as the inventory held, and the U.S. operations show more poise and growth in the next coming years. Here you can see BMW sales across the U.S. and Europe regions. We specifically chose BMW sales as similarity to the manufacturing of Express Auto and Fontaine Motors. The Europe operations have dominant sales, as most of those brands have recognition among consumer basis and spending.
Currently, the climate of the auto market in both the US and EU is, we have to consider that relative to where both economies have been coming following the recession. If we go back to the previous graph that Cole brought up, we see that the recession for the auto market has lagged from the general recession in the housing market, as well as the overall economies of both the US and EU. We see in 2007 to 2009 there was a steep decline in sales in both markets. And then from 2009 to 2011 in the European operations, we see some recovery. However, we've seen stagnant growth between 2011 and 2012 for European sales. Whereas in the US, we see this continued upward growth of sales in the US market. Given this, there are some other things that have been occurring in the industry that we view as making a favorable market to go ahead and sell luxury vehicles in. The first is that during the recovery there has been a lowering of interest rates to the point that this creates optimal condition for buyers, especially buyers of luxury vehicles, to go ahead and be able to finance these expenditures. Furthermore, analysts have projected that the US market is going to continue to grow as far as that trend represented in the previous graphic. These things have impacted our evaluation by us increasing our discrete period growth rate applied for the US operations. Another point to consider is the macroeconomic policy that both the US and EU have rolled out to aid in the recovery of both economies. The US has enacted two major policies, the first being quantitative easing, the second being TARPA, the Troubled Asset Relief Program. Both of these programs are designed to buy up some of the toxic assets that led in part to the initial recession. What this has done is it's decreased the supply of assets on the market, but the demand has remained fixed. This has led to an appreciation of asset value, and for those high net worth individuals who are already the predominant owners of assets, they've seen the appreciation of their net worth. Conversely, the EU has tried to enact similar policies, however their efforts have been farthest fruitful relative to the United States. Furthermore, the European Central Bank has expressed concerns that there may be a deepening of the recession moving forward. Both the US and EU macroeconomic policy impacts our valuation of your company by us increasing the discrete period growth rate for both the US. However, we have decreased the growth rate for the discrete period in the EU. Furthermore, we also have decreased the terminal growth rate in the EU due to this pessimistic economic outlook.
Okay, so this is Kira's part, so I'm going to try my best, and Ryan is going to jump in as needed. So here's the growth rates that we applied to our forecast. As you can see, for the US operations, in the discrete period, we are applying a 4% market increase. On top of that, we're applying a 4% luxury market premium and an ownership adjustment of 8%. This 8% is 8% of the total of market increase plus luxury market premium. And our total growth rate for US is 8.6%. While in the terminal period we applied a 3.5%. For the European operations, in the discrete period we're applying a 4% market increase once again, and 8% ownership adjustment. This 8% is 8% or 4%. And the total growth rate comes to 4.3%. And for the terminal period we applied a 2.5% growth rate. Go ahead.
And just to go ahead and reiterate where these values are coming from, we see the 4% luxury market premium based on our outlook on the US market and how high net worth individuals have seen the appreciation of asset value That coupled with the low interest rates, we believe makes it so that there is going to be an increase in demand for luxury vehicles that your franchisors sell. Furthermore, the 3.5% growth rate is above inflation because we believe that the U.S. auto industry, specifically the luxury auto industry in the U.S. is going to outperform the economy. Similarly, the 2.5% growth rate is derived from the EU macroeconomic outlook. Since we believe that there's going to be a deepening of the recession in the EU, we have modeled a lower discrete period growth rate.
You might as well just keep going.
Okay.
Yeah, you're much better than me at this.
Okay.
Yeah.
To go ahead and assess the discount rate we applied to the firm, we took several different approaches. The first was for our equity approach, we used both a build-up and cap-in method. To use these, we used the BVR calculator, which is a cost of capital calculator. To do this, we went ahead and resulted in a weighted average cost of capital of 8.84%, weighting both the build-up and cap-in. That went ahead and turned that factor into the cost of common equity there. For our cost of debt, we looked at the observed interest rate based on the interest expense in 2012 over the long-term debt in 2011. We found the observed interest rate to be 5%. We then made the assumption that you would be able to negotiate similar interest rates based on maintaining the same credit worthiness moving forward, and thus we applied the same 5% moving forward. As to the tax rate applied, we looked at the observed tax rate in both the US and EU, and in both markets that was a 35% observed tax rate. This went ahead and resulted in a WACC of 6.84%. However, we made some adjustments to that. The first was a 5% premium added on for both the US and EU. This was represented because your firm only sells one grade of manufacturing. This goes ahead and is inherently risky because it limits the market that you can sell or that might be able to purchase from you. And we added that on for both the US and EU. We then added on a 2% premium as well as per Demotoring's cost of capital based on there being an inherent risk in selling in the EU market. Again, that was added to the EU, and that resulted in us having an 11.84% WACC for the US operations and a 13.84% WACC for the EU operations. Looking at the income statement provided by your firm, we went ahead and made some adjustments based on some nuances that happen in the auto industry, as well as some things that you brought up in the case. The first was this $1 million non-recurring expense. We went ahead and added that back into the operating income for both the US and EU. We went ahead and added $600,000 back to the US because that was the proportion that was represented from the US, and $400,000 to the EU. We then went ahead and modeled an annual rent expense. And this is because whichever portion of the firm transacts, or if they don't transact at all, there is value in your real estate, and we wanted to subtract that from operations. So to do this approach, to go ahead and get this approximated rent expense, we went ahead and consulted with some of our private consultants, as well as talked to some of your managers of your franchisors, and we found that for your PP&E value, 60% of that was attributable to the building. From there, we then added in the value of real estate above book, and then from there, we took an 8% cap rate to this to go ahead and get an approximate rent expense for both operations. We'll see here that in the US, that approximate expense was $2.3 million, and in the EU, it was $2.9 million. There was another component that we had to address, which was the floor plan financing expense. This was an operating expense, and to do that, we went ahead and modeled a floor line growth of 23%, and then a floor line interest rate of 2%, and this again was an interest expense that we found based on our conversations with some of our outside consultants, as well as some of the some of your managers of your various franchisors. And then one last adjustment we made was the 1.5 million operating efficiency savings in the EU, and again, that is brought up by the Euro card bid that you currently have on the table.
Okay, so here's our analysis using the income approach method. So you can see for European operations, our value using discounted cash flow is 36 million. However, to this we added the real estate on top of that and came to an enterprise value of $47.2 million. For the consolidated operations, similar thing. So for our value for the discounted cash flow, we come at 204 million. We then added the U.S. real estate and the European real estate as well as the LIFO reserve because the U.S. operations are using a LIFO method. And we came to an estimated enterprise value of 225 million and a half.
In regards to our market approach, these two guideline transaction listeds are not the only guideline companies that we researched and took into account. These, the HR-owned and for two motors, are the most respectable and reasonable to the Express Auto in terms of size and revenue and the type of manufacturing that they sell in the auto industry. HR-owned and for two are both based out of the UK and manufacture similar luxury brands. HR-owned had a EBITDA of 5 million and a net income of 13 million, or EBITDA of 13 million for the two motors. From this, we decided a 7 times EBITDA multiple for the EU operations. It's smaller than the consolidated because of the languishing growth rates, and we felt that it wouldn't accurately reflect it if we had it at a higher multiple. Now, for the EU operations, at an EBITDA projected in 2013 at 11 million, we come to an estimated enterprise value of 77 million. We'll then adjust in the real estate above book value, and to come to a market value of 87 million. In terms of our consolidated operations, we had a forecasted EBITDA of 2013 for 35 million and a market value of the total 270 million.
We presented to you two valuation methods, one using DCF and one using the market approach. However, these two analysis don't actually capture the value of inventory of Express Auto and dealer incentives that you are receiving from BMW. So for this reason, we also analyzed your company using a blue sky method, which is widely used in valuation for auto dealerships because it actually captures current market conditions, the value of inventory, the value of intangible or goodwill and franchise assets. It is measured as a multiple of pre-tax earnings, and this multiple changes every year, and it depends on manufacturer and how well the manufacturer is doing. So these are the inputs that we used in our blue sky analysis. So first we calculated the net tangible asset values. We took the tangible assets, which subtracted the liabilities. We then added the market value of the real estate, both for the US and the European, and we also added our adjusted PP&E. And then we added for the US operations our LIFO reserve of 4.5 million. To this, we added the intangible asset value. We took a multiple of pre-tax. We multiplied that to our normalized pre-tax. And we took into account the 1.5 million synergies for the EU transaction. So we looked at the Kerrigan report to find our multiple of pre-tax. As you can see here, we have 2011 sales per franchise and our blue sky multiple. Fontaine Motors is similar to BMW, so we are looking at 7 times multiple. Okay. So here's our valuation using blue sky. For European operations, we come to an enterprise value of 87.4 million, and for the consolidated operations, we come to an enterprise value of 268 million.
One contingency brought up in the case was brought to you as the board by Todd Thompson. He brought the idea of having a $55 million dividend recapitalization, and the purpose of this would be to finance Sarah and Shauna's venture in Paris. To go ahead and assess how this should best be done, we recommend that you go to the bond market. We have consulted some of our we have talked to some of our consultants at various lending agencies, and they assess that your firm would, based on your current financial health, would be rated at a AA bond. And currently in 2012, AA bonds are seeing a yield of 4.5%, and thus we applied that. To go ahead and look at this, the bonds would have a face value of $1,000, meaning that you would have to raise 55,000 bonds. Years to maturity, we modeled at 5 years. After this 5 years, you could have the option to either refinance or pay off the bonds in full. 2 payments per year, and then the coupon payment associated with this bond based on these metrics would be $2.475 million. One concern that you as the board expressed in the case was whether or not the firm would have enough operating income to go ahead and meet this debt obligation associated with the dividend recapitalization. In each of the evaluation methods that we presented to you, we did model in this increased interest expense, and then every single year, based on our assumptions in the forecast, the resulting forecast, we had more than enough pre-operating income to suffice this debt obligation. We have shown you 3 different methodologies that we approached in coming up with the valuation of Express Auto Inc. The Blue Sky method, valued at $87.4 million. We weighted this at 50% because it's accurately capturing the value of inventories, as well as accurately capturing dealer incentives, and any other nuances that both the DCF and mortgage approach are not just based on the inputs to the methodology. We then modeled the DCF method at 40%. We are confident in the approach we took and how we normalized the income statement, but there are things like dealer incentives that this methodology is not able to accurately capture, therefore the lower weighting. We then weighted the market approach at 10%. Similarly to the DCF, we are confident in the approach we took. However, the market multiple is using a multiple that's based on guideline transactions that don't fully fit in with how your firm has performed and how we expect it to perform coming out of the recession. Similarly to the DCF, it also doesn't accurately capture value of dealer incentives. This weighted value has an estimated enterprise value of $71.3 million. We then also established a range of plus or minus 5%. This is representative of any changes that could happen in macroeconomic policy into the future that we didn't fully model in our assumptions. Based on this range, we see a range of $67.5 million to $74.5 million for the EU operations. For the consolidated valuation, we took a similar approach as we did for the European operations. We see that the estimated enterprise value is $251.4 million, with a range between $238.4 million and $263.5 million. Our analysis was based on an outlook of the macroeconomic policy and its impacts in both the U.S. and EU market, as well as how the auto industry has recovered and where it's projected to go moving into the future. The European operations have not been performing nearly as well as the U.S. operations. Furthermore, the European economy is expected to go into a deepening recession, which is expected to reduce consumer expenditure in those nations. Furthermore, several nations have been experiencing debt crises, which are not projected to improve anytime soon. Furthermore, the U.S. operation, or the EU operations, have only brought 34% of the consolidated revenue, or of revenue relative to the consolidated revenue as compared to the United States. Furthermore, there has been a declining in European inventories. After talking with some of the managers of your franchisers, that's based on their expectations that there isn't going to be enough demand in the European markets moving forward to warrant investing capital into new inventories. Todd Thompson has also brought a tremendous deal of value to your firm by cultivating relationships with various franchisors, with your manufacturer in both the U.S. and EU, and we have modeled this in both the U.S. and EU operations. Finally, the U.S. economy is projected to grow moving into the future, as are U.S. auto sales, and we have modeled this in our discrete growth, or the discrete period growth rate for the U.S. operations. Our advice to you is to accept the bid of $75 million offered by Europcar. This bid is currently coming with a premium of between 1 and 11% relative to the value we assessed based on that value range we had presented in the previous slide. Furthermore, any market value over book value for the real estate is temporary. With the changing trends in the European economy, this value over book could be lost in a year, and we recommend you transact now in order to capture that. How Partners NYC is undervaluing the consolidated operations. If you were interested in selling the consolidated, we would recommend you go back and negotiate. However, if they're not willing to up the price, up their bid offer between $238 and $263 million, we recommend to not consider that offer. Finally, as to the dividend recap contingency that was brought by Todd Thompson, since we have modeled it and we have reassured that you have plenty of operating income to meet this associated debt obligation, we recommend that if Sarah and Sean need any additional capital that they will not receive from their equity payout to finance their new Paris venture, you would be able to take the full $55 million if need be. Thank you very much for allowing us to present this valuation to you as the board. We hope that what we have presented is beneficial in future decision making.
Right.
Hey, nicely done. And I saw you channeling your inner Kiras here and there.
It was hard.
Yeah, but honestly, that you let it flow as well as you did, having to step in for her like this, is to your credit. It's hard to do.
That is hard to do. And it was, for the most part, was seamless. I couldn't tell, with the exception of when you said, this is Kira's section,
Yeah.
I wouldn't know. If you wouldn't have said that, I wouldn't know.
Okay. So I think since I've seen last night's and I know kind of where you're headed since, why don't you give Jeff a sense of what changes, because there are some major
Yeah,
differences.
I suspect that's the, I suspect that's the case.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear those, because that'll change my
Yeah.
feedback.
So, going first into the discount rates we applied, and apologies for my voice, I'm having a cold right now. So we upped the discount rates for both the US and EU operations.
You increased the discount
We
rates.
increased the discount rate.
Okay?
And that was based in part response that we got from Barrett and Michael, and that went ahead and influenced how we changed the valuation as a whole.
Okay?
So we increased the EU discount rate from 14% to 17%, and we increased the US discount rate from 12% to 15%, still modeling that 2% buffer based on the Modrin's risk premium for US.
So for each one of these items, Ryan, rather than have Jeff respond afterwards, not taking notes, so as they give you an item of adjustment, what do you think of that adjustment?
Well, go to your, you've got two slides back to back in the valuation section, where you show the values. Let's start with the EU, where you show the values for the three approaches.
Oh, the final.
Now, I don't know if you're making any other adjustments, but this really concerns me, that your DCF is so much lower.
Right.
And I'm surprised that you're increasing your discount rate, because unless you're changing some of the others, that disparity is gonna get larger.
And
So, go
from
ahead.
what we did, based on the feedback we got from Barrett and Michael, that's where we increased our discount rate, because they thought it was they said it was far too low.
They've done something else though. Why don't you move to your growth rate?
So our
Okay,
growth-
because my biggest, and maybe this, you can help frame your comments to mine, my biggest concern and critique is, and it's this slide right here. You've said Europe is worth somewhere between 47 and 87 million. They've offered us 75, so you should accept the 75, but if you've got any problems with that DCF, you're giving a terrible recommendation, because they're leaving $12 million on the
Yeah.
table.
Right.
The adjustments we made to the
Yeah.
DCF, the value now is, for the EU, it's
I'll go to that.
Yeah, Sean,
91.
it's gonna change the whole
Yeah,
landscape.
okay.
It's
But
around
the
91.
factor of
96,
change,
yeah.
I think you need to be talking about. I want to see how you react to the factor of change.
So the European discrete period growth rate we applied was at 4 with the 8% adjustment. We went ahead and bumped up the market growth rate for the EU to 25%. And then we also bumped up the long-term growth rate from 2.5% to 3%. And that's with a 17% discount rate. And then,
So,
do you want me to break here?
well, yes, so here's, one of the questions that I wrote down as you're going through this. You've got your own projections here. how do these compare to management's projections? And with that change, are you getting a lot more aggressive than management was, or is this more conservative?
I want to say this is more aggressive.
The adjustments are more aggressive.
So that's, I have never told a client they were being too conservative on their projections unless I knew that their goal was to get the lowest valuation possible, which happens at, sometimes they're doing it for tax purposes and they want a low valuation, they go, your projections are way too low. But more often than not, even when they want a low value, look at the projections, well, this is way too high. I would be concerned about taking a position that management, you're being way too conservative. We see this thing growing like crazy. Go back to your discount rate slide.
And this was curious part, so I do apologize.
No, that's fine. I get it. One thing I was going to say, just as a side note, I would switch the order of these two.
Yeah.
The tables.
The one that's on the right is the one you need to talk about first.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, the easiest place you can play with is that single manufacturer risk premium, 5%. What's your basis for that? And I know conceptually what it is. What's the, do you have any quantitative basis? Or is that the extraction method?
That's the,
So you've added 500 basis points to the discount rate. You guys know what a basis point is? You know when I'm talking about basis points? So every 1% is 100 basis points. And when you talk, particularly when you're talking about lending money, you hear people talking basis points. Do you guys have any idea what a borrowing rate is on like a car loan or a home loan or anything like that today? Okay, so on a car loan, you can lend at 4%. You've increased this by 5%. That's more than a car loan. That's a pretty big increase. Now, I'd be lying if I said I haven't taken increases that large or much larger. I've taken much larger than that. But I like to have a basis for it. And so you guys are taking more aggressive projections and you're offsetting that by increasing the discount rate. I actually think you might be better off to go the other direction and dial back the projections and dial back your discount rate. I agree with the other mentors that when I look at that cost of equity of 9% looks a little low to me, but it's also a pretty big operation, right? When I look at your WACs, those WACs don't feel out of line to me, but your concluded discounted cash flow value is so much lower than your other methods. That's what gives me a little heartburn.
And if you want, I can go into what the DCF value
Sure.
is based on this
Sure.
adjustment. So we got a DCF for the European operations based on the 25% discrete, and then
And that's 25% growth per year?
Yeah. Now, one thing I
We had
will
this
say.
conversation an hour ago.
Okay, so let's get into basic supply and demand. Maybe that's not the right way to say it, but how do these guys sell more vehicles? Sorry, I answered my own question. How do they grow by 25%?
They sell
They sell more vehicles. How do they sell 25% more vehicles?
by consumer or consumers buying.
Yeah, you got consumers buying more.
Now, one issue I will say with the forecast provided, the growth rate that they were applying into the future was based on historical growth. And one assertion I would like to argue is that they haven't properly modeled the increase in the auto industry, at least in the US, following the
Well,
slump.
and that might be fair,
So
right?
is that a circumstance where we could say your US forecasts are not aggressive enough? Would that be reasonable?
I wouldn't describe it that way, but you could certainly say that. What I want you to do and what I love having you guys do is challenging management projections and having a good basis for it. My experience is that management is never, they're generally aggressive, right? Everybody's optimistic. Every entrepreneur you ever meet is bullish on his or her business.
So try a response like this. We noticed that you have modeled your future growth expectations for the U.S. operations based upon your historical growth. But your historical growth really is covering a period in which we were just beginning to come out of a recession. And we know that auto manufacturing and sales lagged that because of how tight credit was. So we're concerned that you may have understated growth prospects. We see that you show them running at X%, but our industry analysis would suggest they're going to grow at X plus Y%, because credit is loosened up. We find that there's pent-up demand amongst the U.S. consumer. And you're able to say all of this without it having the benefit of hindsight, because these were real thoughts at the time, okay? So you can say that about the U.S. You can't say any of that about Europe. Because Europe arguably never got there. It hasn't gotten there yet, rather. Think about that. That would be credible?
Absolutely. I like that argument. I don't, if you put 25% a year on there, I don't buy it. And this is not, car dealers are not a business where you can grow like that, right? Software sales, yeah. I see that quite often in software sales. I see projections much larger than that, but car dealers, you could maybe look at a profit margin, right? The sales are gonna grow steadily, but we think we've got some room in that profit margin to bump it up. So my rule of thumb, this is valuation according to me, you'll never find this in a book, but when I look at those three numbers in your value column, I expect the difference to be about 10%. And if they're, sometimes they can get into that 15 to 20% range, and I can still buy it. But what you said is, hey guys, I got great news. The European operations were somewhere between 47 and $87 million. That's meaningless to me. That tells me that tells me that there's an error in the analysis.
Ryan, before Jeff goes any further, why don't you tell him what your updated values with the European operation?
So your DCF is 96 million, market is 116, and Blue Sky is 113.
Okay, so that range, it's not quite 10%, but
better.
But it's much better. Okay, and the thing I remember with this type of a project is the objective here is not to put a stake in the ground and say the company is worth $103 million. The objective is to say, hey, we've got an offer on the table, and should we accept or reject this? In fact, we got two offers on the table. Should we accept or reject one or both of these offers? And you don't need to weight the values. You don't need to come to a point value conclusion. A range is absolutely appropriate for this type of a context, because you can say, hey, every way we look at this thing, that $75 million offer is way too low. We think you're leaving money on the table if you accept it. Okay? But I'm concerned about the way you get to that DCF number. I think that's got some real challenges.
So you
Possibly tone back, growth, and tone back the discount as well.
Well, you have to tone down that growth.
Yeah.
That's way too low. The discount rate, I don't see all of the components that you've put into when you use the BB calculator. You haven't presented all of the components that you use to get there. You just say, hey, we plugged it into the calculator, which incidentally, and this might be Kira's section, I think you said. I don't know if you all have written out your parts or what you're going to say. Do not say we plug it into the BB calculator. Right. This is the answer that it gave us, right? Because that tells me that you guys aren't experts. You just use software. Even if you just use software, you're the experts on it.
Yeah, you told us you used the build-up method. That's all we need to know.
Yeah. Okay. What I will say, I would actually go back and revisit the build-up and cap-in methods. Those feel low to me. I mean, just So if you listen to Demoterin will tell you that your discount rate should be between 8 and 10%, because that's what the market returns. My experience is when I'm looking at privately held companies, my cost of equity, absent something abnormal, is gonna be in the 14 to 20% range. Okay, so that your 8 to 9.5 looks pretty low to me. The other comment I'll make, that single manufacturer risk premium and the EU risk premium, those typically get added to your cost of equity, not to your WACC.
But it's part of why your cost of equity ends up upwards of 20%, right?
Yes, yeah, I mean, well, sort of. So the country risk premium, I'm gonna leave out of this conversation, because typically I'm dealing with US-based companies. What you've called the single manufacturer risk premium, I would term a company-specific risk premium. I actually like that you've called the single manufacturer risk premium, because you've identified, here's the reason we've added it. Now, I get a little more vague than that, because the one challenge you've got here is you just pinned yourself down that the reason you've added this is single manufacturer risk. If they ask you a question and you say, well, have you accounted for this? If you call that specific company risk, and they say, well, have you accounted for the fact that X, Y, Z, you say, well, yeah, that's in my specific risk premium. I had a call with a client today. She goes, well, how are you accounting for this? I go, oh, that's in my discount rate.
The other thing I want you to consider here with respect to this, and last night you call that a company-specific risk premium.
Yeah.
You've heard now that maybe there's a reason to keep this, or at least indicate that the single manufacturer is a good part of this. I got another argument why there should be some risk premium in here. I'm uncomfortable with 5% because I think it's really high, okay? But if you increase your cost of equity appropriately, then you're going to come up with a WACC still of about where we're at here, okay? However, the founder and the guy that put this whole thing together just died. He's turning it over to his son. How many times does the second generation have the shoulders that was experienced by the first generation? Not typically. I think that's a risk premium, or that deserves a risk premium. That's me.
Yeah, I mean, it's the one question I would have to that is, if I come in and buy this, or if you come in and buy this, can we mitigate that by putting someone else in place in that position?
Sure. Yeah, we can. Okay, and that's fair. So you were using 15 and 17% in your new projections, which yielded much greater values because you also were using much higher growth rates. Why don't you tell Jeff what your U.S. growth rate is?
35%.
35?
And we got to that partly by looking at where the U.S. auto sales, what was the growth rate in sales coming out of the slump of the recession. But
So,
that could be
Ryan,
too high.
is it possible that you took those numbers from a period that was not simply a year? Because we had some nice jumps in sales,
Yeah.
without question. And we almost certainly had months in which we saw that, right? I don't know that we saw that for a year, not in luxury brands.
Yeah, I guess I don't buy that number.
And here's part of how you can gauge this. Some of these things just have to pass the common sense smell test. Had we seen a 35% jump, that means that the manufacturer had enough inventory on hand to warrant the 35% jump. And yeah, the manufacturers were dying here. But I think with 35% inventory on hand, more than normal, or even if it's 20% more than normal, then that's enormous.
Well, that would create some real cash flow
Oh,
problems.
horrible
too.
cash flow problems for the manufacturer, if not for the firm.
Yeah, and for a
Right.
firm, because they've got to, I mean, depending on how the flooring lines work.
Yeah.
They've got to buy all this inventory. It's a lot easier to decline than it is to grow from a cash flow standpoint. Growing is expensive.
So, and we had this conversation, the three of us in my office a few minutes ago. So, and it probably sounds like I'm belittling you, and you know I don't intend it to sound like that. I think you guys know I respect each of you. Let's revisit that. My guess is if we modulate this discount rate to a level that makes good sense and we can back up. If we then moderate the growth rate, we can come up with a number where that DCF's not so far out of line. Now,
The assumptions you presented here didn't strike me as unreasonable.
right.
What struck me as unreasonable was your conclusion based on those assumptions. I think that 5% specific risk is too much, and I would be curious, if you were to use these assumptions you've got in this presentation here and remove the 5% specific risk, would you get to a number that's closer to your other approaches?
And then apply the premiums to
Yeah,
the
to your
cost of equity. It's gonna bring your WACC down, right?
Yep.
Okay, which is gonna bring your value up, even with a lesser growth rate. So let's take a look at that. One of my concerns, and go back to your weights of the values.
For EU?
Yeah,
It's the same weights, so.
yeah. So not only do we see such a wide difference, but you've applied a 40% weight to that. If you're going to use a number that I would think of as an outlier and probably throw out if it was accurate, if you're going to use it at all, you'd give it a really light weight. My sense is that A, we can revisit that number and find something that is more consistent, but B, just as Jeff said, they're going to come in relatively similar to each other. There's no reason to weight them. I mean, one's at 87.4, one's at 87.5. It doesn't matter how you weight them, they're still going to come in around $87 million and some change.
And then you don't need to diminish, this approach is better than the
Right,
other.
exactly.
You just say, look, no matter how I look at this, you know, I like to describe, I've heard valuation described as a three-legged stool. You know, I've used these three approaches to support my conclusion. I've described it as a GPS unit. I'm pinging off of 3 different satellites to pinpoint the value. You're welcome to steal those or not, but at the end of the day, the weighting, you know, my opinion is that the weighting shouldn't matter, right? Unless we've got an approach where we say, this is not good, this is not a comparable approach for this reason or the other, and that's why it's giving us such an outlier of a value. Saying the DCF method is the outlier will never fly with the judges. Okay, to a group of accountants, the DCF is the method.
Right.
And
Wherever they
everything else is a shortcut. Okay, now Blue Sky is a little unique here because in the industry, everybody buys and sells dealerships based on Blue Skies. Nobody looks at a DCF when the dealers don't look at a DCF when they're buying or selling. We do it as valuation professionals because I believe a Blue Sky is a shortcut for a DCF. But, and your judges are going to be looking for a DCF.
It'll be interesting to see how much the judges know about the blue. I know that David Beard, the challenge organizer, knows this very well because this is actually a real case with some made up numbers, and he did the valuation. I just don't know the firm.
Interesting.
Yeah. But he's not one of the judges. They got the same material you got though, so I'm going to suppose that they certainly have a better grasp on this stuff than I do, and maybe even better than you do. But I don't know if they understand the blue as well as you guys at this point.
Like, I'll tell you, every valuation book I've ever read, they never talk about the Blue Sky.
Right. I'd never heard of it before we saw the case.
I learned about it valuing dealerships.
So move on and
Yeah.
help us understand some of the other recommendations. Now we know that some of your numbers are wildly different now. So instead of making you account for the numbers you've got there, just kind of walk us through where you think you are now. Because you got some really rich stuff that's not here.
Yep, so as part of the recommendation we make, I think we need to solidify what our discount rate is for that, for just the growth rate accordingly. And we have a few options. So based on the numbers we ran, we came up with the option that the values were, we valued the firm well above the bid offers, and we were going to recommend that the board walk away from the table. Furthermore, the dividend recap, we should also walk away from that, and instead, we recommended that there be an equity payout for Shauna by going to the bond market, raising that through bonds, giving a single payout to her to reduce her equity value so that Sarah and Shauna could go conduct the Paris venture. That would reduce Shauna's equity stake to, based on the numbers we had in our updated model, about $9 million. And then we modeled it that that money would flow into a trust. And then at the death of Sarah, her interest in the company would flow to Todd and Shauna. At that point, Todd would have majority ownership of the company, and Sarah would be, or Shauna would be a minority equity holder.
Is Sarah upset you're putting her in the grave?
Potentially. But the process was that her husband just died. We could approximate.
Yeah.
And they haven't polished this part yet.
Yeah,
We
sure,
were talking about this a
sure.
couple hours ago. But we're kind of interested to see just how you react to that. So Sarah's going to be upwards of 75 years old. Her husband has just passed away. We have these 2 adult children. Shauna really wants to create an operation in Paris. We're going to say that we assume that that's really being driven more by Shauna than Sarah. For heaven's sake, Sarah's 75 years old.
Right.
Okay? And so if we have Shauna sell much of her interest back to the firm, and the firm raises money to buy that, then it reduces Shauna's equity stake, but now Shauna has all of the Parisian operation. And Todd doesn't want any part of it anyway, was her? But now we have to know that realistically Sarah's going to die sometime in the next 15, 20 years, and now her remaining stake will be split equally between the 2 kids. And so Todd, once again, ends up with what he's looking for. Shauna didn't get cut out, but Shauna ends up owning the Parisian operation of whatever it happens to be. Plausible? Not plausible?
Yeah, very, very much so. So I'm just trying to think through this a little bit.
By the way, they own these in trusts. Upon the passing of the founder, everything transferred through trust, right? You
Well,
never would it.
It would go into his estate, and then it depends on what his will say. Does his will say that the kids have trusts that are set up?
He owns an asset worth $200
I
million.
would hope he's got
Darn
some
well
good,
better.
I hope he's got some good estate planning.
Yeah, so we can credibly presume that it
Yeah.
has. Into this day and age, if it didn't, it's neglect at best.
So let me back up. You're keeping everything. You're not selling anything off. You're gonna do the dividend recap.
This would be based on the valuation.
And so, one thing I was curious about with your dividend recap, do your cash flow support the interest expense? And you said they could just refinance this at the end of 5 years. Todd's expressed concern about this, about having this, the ability to pay this debt. Could they pay the principal off? What type of a debt service payment would they need to pay both principal and interest? And perhaps, you've only used a 5-year term, that's not a very long term. You could look at a longer term, but, how long would it take to pay it off in full, principal and interest?
So they're running an EBIT of what? Or
Based on which?
You don't know right now.
well, based on their projections. Let's go there.
Based on their projections, I think they're running an EBIT of $5 million.
So, and their
base
EBITDA
year.
was 7 or 8?
Yeah, well, again, we don't know if we would be valuing it based on would the consolidated operations be floating this interest?
Yeah, yeah, right.
If your recommendation is we're gonna keep the whole thing,
Yeah.
The whole thing to pay for.
yeah.
Then based off of their forecast, they're sitting at a base year
EBITDA.
EBITDA of $16 million, and that's growing. I think their growth rate they applied for the consolidated was roughly 5%.
So on a $16 million EBITDA, no problem with a $2.5 million interest payment, even if you do a sinking fund to pay off the debt over a 5 to 10 year period of
Yeah,
time.
you should be okay.
Yeah, they still have a nice coverage ratio to weather any shocks.
So I like that. if you look at if you look at the goals, that doesn't get Sarah and Shauna out today. Which, you're reading into the case and saying, they want out today because they want the Paris operation, not because they want to get out. So that's the one downside I see with this, is 75% of the owners say we want out. And you're saying, sorry guys, but you're also saying, the reason the reason you can't get out is because we think that they're trying to steal the company from them.
The value is too high to accept these, so let's find a way to give you some of the cash you want to do the thing you want. And by the way, Sarah, just wait. It won't take long.
We'll take some of that 55 million and get you a casket.
That's a nice casket.
Yeah. But I like, I'll take, the thing that I think will play well is creativity. It's not the valuation, right? You've got to have the valuation to say, you have to do the work to reach your conclusion and show that conclusion is reasonable and rational. But then your creativity of helping everybody meet their objectives that I think is where you can really shine. So I like that idea.
But not so much with the 25 and 35% growth rates.
No.
Yeah,
That's where I think you got to revisit the values and make sure that's really where you end up.
One of the things that may happen, you may revisit those. You may find your values have changed enough that your recommendation structure changes. My sense is it probably won't. But I don't think you can have the big spread that you're looking at numerically right now.
With adjustments for Europe, it was the market approach was 116.
So when we redid it with these larger growth rates, the spread of the U.S. or the EU was between 96 million and 116 million, but then the U.S. was between 151 and 161.
Okay.
The spread there, based on these very large growth rates.
Yes, I like that. Tell me this. Eurocar's offering you $75 million, and they believe that that's more than a fair offer because they bring synergies to the table. Why would they be offering you so far below what you guys think the value is worth?
I think that's where we have to go back and reassess our growth rate and the discount
Well,
rate.
let's think of a plausible answer to that question though while we're sitting right here. Do you have one?
I don't know, I'm just gonna try. What if we say that Shauna and Sarah want out from the company?
It's not going to be part of Eurocar's problem. Eurocar has their own
fair enough.
motivations.
No, but I like it, because
Okay.
what you'll say
So-
is that they're trying to take advantage of us.
Right, exactly, that's where I was
They
going.
know,
Sorry.
Yeah,
they
no, it's
know
good.
the old man just died,
Right,
and they see this as a huge opportunity. Hey, we've got a strong operation. They
Mhm.
know we've got a strong operation.
right, they want a good deal.
And they think that they can really take advantage of that.
Right.
That said, do you think they would be able to plausibly take advantage at a bid of 75 million, where we're, based on these numbers, are valuing it between 96 and 116?
Well, that's,
Well, think of it like this. After the real estate crisis, who were the first major buyers that started to re-enter the marketplace? Bottom feeders,
Yeah.
low bid offers. So in 2012, the European auto industry auto retailing had not returned. Not in Europe itself, and arguably it still hasn't returned. Very good chance these are bottom feeders. I mean, so either way, you can give a plausible argument.
now my one concern, you did a really good job up front going through the economy, and particularly the European economy, and, we're recommending you sell this because, man, things are not good. You can use that to say this is why they're the bottom feeder, so to speak. But that contradicts, that may contradict, if you're not careful, your DCF assumptions.
Mhm.
So you gotta be really careful with making sure you're consistent throughout that whole narrative. And the same question with Help Partners. They're offering you 173, you're saying it's worth 200 some odd. Why? Why are they offering you so far below what it's, I'll describe it like this. I am very, very hesitant to tell my client to reject a deal when there's money that's being offered on the table. I'm quick to tell them to be hesitant before buying a company, and slow to tell them to reject an offer. Because that's real money that all of a sudden, if I say, yeah, reject that $173 million offer, and then they put it on the market because they decide they're really ready, and the best they get's 150. That's the last thing I want, because I don't want a lawsuit on my hands, is really what it comes down to. And so that's the one area where I would be, I guess I'd encourage you to be cautious, is to say, okay, this is a pretty bold move on our part to say, these guys are trying to hose you, they're trying to take advantage of you. So I double, triple, quadruple check your assumptions and all of your methods to make sure that you're comfortable with that recommendation. Can we go back, just, I guess I'll say this, I'm going back to the discount rate, your cost of equity. So if you look at, let's just take a build-up. And I don't know what the risk-free rate was back in 2012. It would have been relatively low. But I typically use a 20-year T-bill. Is that what you guys are using? Do you know?
I don't know what Kira did, but I would assume.
I mean, if I remember correctly, it should be 2.4%.
What'd you say, 2.4%?
Yeah.
Okay, that would make some sense. Your equity risk premium, what would you expect that to be typically? You guys know, any guess? 6 to 7% is what I would guess. I think that's about what it was at that point in time. So that puts us about 9% there, right? Then you'd add a size premium, which I just pulled a valuation up that I did recently. Size premium was about 5%. I think the size premium was probably about 5% then. And size premium is anywhere from anything with a market cap of less than, I think at that point in time would have been about 300 million. So you guys would be in the smallest size bracket, so that's about a 5% premium. And then on top of that, you'd add some industry risk. Industry risk can be negative, so that could go either direction. But that should put you well above that 8 to 9, 10%. And so that's what Barrett and Michael and Cam, when they're looking at it going, that feels low. It's the size premium, I think. And it could be that, you put it in real dollars and the software asks for it in thousands or something like that. I've admittedly never used the cost of equity calculator, whatever they call it. So I don't know what the inputs are, but that's something I would be mindful of. That's why that one feels so low. Just let me go through my other comments. Oh, go back to what slide was it? You've got a slide where you talk about the DCF doesn't capture certain things. You talk about inventory and...
Is where you were talking about the sky, blue sky.
Right here. Explain to me why and/or how the DCF and market multiple approaches don't capture the value of inventory.
The adjustments for inventories on a FIFO basis. So the blue sky captures above that fair market value above.
So you're talking a LIFO adjustment.
Yeah.
So let's assume it's on a, let's assume it's on a FIFO basis. Let's just assume it's a normal company, not a car dealership. Do you guys typically make an inventory adjustment to your DCF? Why not?
Because we're valuing the income, not the value of the
Okay,
asset.
but why, so let's go with that. That's right, you're absolutely right. Have you, when you value that income, have you included the asset value or not?
What does the inventory do for you?
It's our revenue.
It generates revenue.
Right.
So,
He's been teaching a lot longer than I have, so he can twist these questions to get, to help you get the right answer. Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, so when you value a cash flow stream, you cannot generate that cash flow stream without the assets. Okay, so embedded in that, in your DCF value, is the value of all the assets, including your inventory. So that first thing is wrong. On the market multiple approach, does your market multiple capture your inventory or not?
no. Well, wouldn't it capture how guideline transactions have performed with their inventory?
Well,
Yes.
and algebraically, what is a market multiple?
It's a growth rate.
Well, and it's a derivation of a KVD construction of free cash flow.
The market multiple, any market approach is just a shortcut for a DCF.
Yep. And algebraically, you guys know that, okay?
So-
Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, your first statement there, I think, is wrong. And then the second one, I'm gonna ask you the same questions. How does the DCF and market multiple approach not capture the dealer incentives?
I guess what we meant by that is we weren't able to extract exactly the value of the dealer incentives and adjust it in our normalized.
Do you know how the dealer incentives come through the income statement? Do you know enough about them to be able to tell us that? Got it. So dealer incentives are effectively rebates or reductions of interest expense or some kind of points. And so they're going to come through the income statement, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Normally what happens with these dealer incentives is they get reported as other income, so it's gonna be below your EBITDA line. If you go back to the case, there's nothing below operating income that would be considered dealer incentives.
Right.
So either Fontaine never offers dealer incentives, which we can assume is not the case, or they just captured it up either as a revenue component or a reduction of cost of goods sold. So by default, those dealer incentives are embedded in your financials.
And maybe a better way, even had those two items been accurate, maybe a better way of calculating this wouldn't be about what DCF and the market multiple don't do, but tell us what the blue does do. And now you haven't stepped into the quagmire regardless. The blue does a great job of capturing current market conditions, inventory, blah, 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 blah.
And the point that I would suggest you drive home with the blue is this is how dealers transact. When I go and talk to dealers and they tell me that they just sold a dealership, they just bought a dealership, it's, well, what did you pay for the blue? Because, and the reason for that is that's capturing the intangible value. We can all agree inventory's worth what the inventory's worth, and the buyer's gonna pay for whatever's on the lot, and the seller's gonna sell whatever's on the lot. It's the blue that is really, that they're really buying. And the other thing that I'll point out is the reason that blue has so much value, car dealerships are much different than other businesses. If I wanna start a restaurant, or if I wanna own a restaurant, I've got options, right? I can go buy an existing restaurant, I can buy a franchise, an existing franchise, I can open up a new franchise, or I can go start my own, right? But with a dealership, can I go start my own dealership? Why not?
The cost. And the barriers to entry in the market.
What is the barrier, what's the number one barrier to entry?
Don't you have to get I'm not exactly sure what it is, but don't you have to become a franchisor, or
Yes.
they have to, like,
The manufacturer has to give you the manufacturer franchise rights. It's a franchisor agreement that gives you the rights to do it. And they don't just give those out willy-nilly. I don't get to call up Ford and say, hey, I got a great idea, I'd really like to start a Ford dealership, can you give me the franchise rights? Okay, so that's really what the blue is trying to capture. That's the primary thing the blue is trying to capture. And you said it right, you said franchisor. That's the right way to say it. Some of you said franchisor. It's OR, and it's one of those words that you actually say franchisor. Okay. You guys did a really good job of eye contact. I was really impressed with that. So good job on that. Okay, on your growth rates, your luxury premium, I think you explained that the growth rate as you've presented here, I realize this might be changing, but you've taken a 4% market increase plus a 4% luxury market premium, which gets us an 8% growth rate, plus an ownership, or multiplied by an ownership adjustment, which is 1.08% times, or 1.08 times the 8%, which gets us to the 8.6%. So walk me through how you've arrived, and if this is totally changing, maybe this isn't relevant, but your market increase and your luxury market premium and your ownership adjustment, what is the basis for all of those numbers?
I mean, the market increase, what we did was we looked at the historical and the historical growth rate provided to us by the company, as well as what they forecasted, and then we broke that up, and then we added additional growth because we felt that the company wasn't capturing this pent-up demand that we believed. That said, I know this is going to be changing, and my question to you would be, is it more confusing to break out the growth rate, or just say, this is the growth rate we're applying in the discrete period?
Well, the answer is yes. Both are confusing. In the sense that I've never seen a growth rate, I shouldn't say I've never seen a growth rate derived this way, but I would expect to see, well, okay, let me say it like this. It's confusing the way you've got it here, because it's 4 plus 4, and then I've never heard of an ownership adjustment. I don't know what that's referring to.
So they would think of that as a best owner premium, but I don't know, are you applying a best owner premium because the synergies available through the potential new owners? Is that what your thought is?
No, we were applying it based on what Todd is bringing to the table.
But it's already, oh, okay. So that's over and above the market because he's got something the market doesn't. You would at worst put, you would subtotal the two 4s into an 8, and then you would do a proportional 8% on top of that if that's what you're trying to do. But that's part of why it's confusing, because we want to mentally add 4, 4, and 8, and we don't get to 8.6. But if I take 8 and then 1.08 of 8, I get to
Yeah, so let's talk about the ownership adjustment. You're growing future revenue from that. Isn't that already reflected in the historical revenue? I mean, so I'm tracking with you that, hey, if there's something unique that somebody brings to the table that they can use to grow this, we
Yeah,
want to capture.
But Jeff, they're not doing it off the company's historical revenue. They're doing it off of the markets. It's the market averages.
Because the
Oh.
historical was about,
Yeah, no,
I think it's
but you're gonna take a growth rate. Yeah, the growth rate's based on the market, but you're gonna take that growth rate and apply it to the company's actual historical revenue, right?
Yeah, but that's not what they've done. Well, they've taken it to a recent revenue.
Yes, so you're gonna take your 2011 or 2012 revenue and grow it. My question is, does what Todd brings to the table, is that already reflected in that revenue number? I'm worried you got a double counting there.
So a best owner premium, which I think is what you're trying to model here, the best owner premium is only going to come into play if there's a change in ownership and that new owner brings something to the table the other one did not. Since Todd isn't, I mean, he might be newly the CEO, but he's not new to the company as far as we know. He probably was raised in the company. So it may not be credible on that basis, but more importantly for us right now, you're taking this whole thing apart anyway and reconstructing.
Yeah, so that may not be a big deal. And then do you have any support for the luxury market premium? Or is that an extraction method? So I would think through that a little, because again, that's 8% growth. 8% growth is quite a bit higher than what I'd expect to see out of a dealership. And I'll tell you, growth in value in dealerships tends to come more from being much more careful and deliberate about our costs than growing revenue.
But would you have said that exact same thing if we were having this conversation in 2012 when we were just coming off of terrible years?
We would certainly project some higher revenue growth.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure we'd get to 8% revenue growth.
Okay.
And so my concern isn't that you have growth on there. My concern is that 8%, doubling it because it's a luxury vehicle, you think there's pent-up demand. In 2012, I'm not sure that's truly the case yet. Maybe it is. For luxury, I'd want to think about that a little bit. But
So what if we approached it by taking what the observed growth rate was, and then we're adding to that growth rate because we believe that there's some pent-up demand, maybe not 4%,
sure.
but maybe it's.
But 1 or 2%, yeah, I'm absolutely on board with that.
Above the market, and that's how we're justifying a higher growth rate.
Yeah.
Because we're saying that
Yeah.
the forecast that management provided us is not capturing this pent-up growth that we expect.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in 2012, the auto manufacturers were still hurting because those big ticket purchases were lagging the rest of consumption as credit was finally starting to loosen up a little bit. They were still hurting. I think it was 2010 or 11. I think it was 2011 when we had the big dust up about them taking their private jets into the Senate hearings. Yeah, so we were still a little uncertain, but uncertainty is great because we know that all things being equal, that we're going to recover from it. I mean, it's just a business cycle, an exaggerated one to be sure, but it's just a business cycle.
Yeah. You've got a slide. Okay, you talk about normalized. You did some of the flooring line growth of 23%. Yes.
I am honestly not sure. I know Kira took the helm on that.
Okay, so I don't know what that means, flooring line growth of 23%. So since she's not here, I'm not going to hold you guys to that. But what I would expect, I expect our flooring line to grow in line with our cost of goods, which is growing in line with our revenue. And so a 23% increase in our flooring line means that we've increased our purchases of vehicles by 23%, which means I sure hope we're selling that many more vehicles, or else we're just eating up a bunch of cash.
I guess it could also mean that we have inventory that's sticking around our lot a whole lot longer than it was before, right?
That could be true.
I think that would make sense.
Do we have units of inventory, or we're just seeing dollar values?
And this is US or EU?
Again, not sure.
Because
This might
if
be
it's
the
EU, that might make sense. And I guess,
I think the floor plan's just US.
I think it's just US. I honestly can't remember.
Well, yeah, I don't think they have the same kind of flooring structure.
No.
in
oh,
Europe.
that's right, that's right.
Yeah, they don't. So
That's
it'd have
right.
to be
So
the
this
US.
has to be the US.
So wouldn't that make sense if we're still coming out of the slump and we haven't been seeing this massive turnover?
It could, yeah. So what's the growth in the inventory? Is the percentage growth in inventory reflective of this? Because that is a hot number. I mean, that's a quarter. So just know you need to scrutinize it.
Yeah, I mean, the big numbers, I mean, when you're talking 1, 2, 3%, I brush over it. Okay, yeah, that's reasonable. 23% is a giant red flag where, oh, what's going on there? But in particular, where you talk about is the normalized income statement. In your normalized income statement, you've got flooring interest expense growing by 23%. I mean, that's how it sounded to me. I can't tell if that's right or not.
Okay.
But that concerned me.
Okay.
Oh, and Rick, back to the percent change in inventories.
Uh-huh.
We only have values from 2010 to 2012. from 2010 to 2011, we see a 5.38% growth, but then from 2011 to 2012, we see a negative 2.14%.
So that 23% has to be wrong. It can't be right.
I've got a few other notes I can't read. In the case, you guys mentioned in the case a lot. In the case, you told us this, in the case, you can just omit those three words from everything you said. Because you said, we understand from our discussions with you, we understand from what you've asked us to do. And you said, you told us in the case. You've told us.
One quick correction, just going back to the inventories, because it's only for the US. US inventories between 2010 and 2011, it's actually a 21.4% growth in inventories.
Okay.
And 2011 through 2012, it's a 10.3%. So the average out is 15.7.
Well, the flooring line expense gonna lag, or should it be real time with?
It'll lag some,
but
but
not that
not
much,
much. I mean, if you're looking at it on an annual basis, I wouldn't expect to see much of a lag.
It's in the EU that we're seeing a negative 12 and negative 20%.
Yeah, see, that doesn't surprise me, 'cause they were still hurting badly.
And so think about that as you look at your DCF. That's an interesting phenomenon. We've got more inventory today than, our inventory is staying on our lot longer. We're expecting that to reduce. What does that do to our cash flow? As our inventory goes down because we're able to sell it quicker.
Well, so say that.
Let's say the average days on a lot is 90 days, and we expect over time we'll get it down to 30 days. What does that do to our inventory?
Wouldn't we reinvest in our inventories to
Yeah,
continue?
so when we reinvest, are we buying more inventory or less inventory?
More inventory, because we're investing our money to go ahead and purchase more cars from our manufacturer.
As we shorten the time that it's on the lot, am I thinking about that right? Maybe I'm
I'm
saying
not
that
sure that
backwards.
you are.
Maybe I'm saying that backwards.
Yeah, 'cause if we're reducing inventories, we're speeding up sales.
We're speeding up sales. I would expect that generates a bunch of cash in that first year.
But where it's a negative change in inventory, wouldn't that assume that they're not investing their money to increase inventories because they are not sure if they're gonna be able to sell them into the future? That
Well,
would be-
maybe I'm misunderstanding. You're talking 2011 to 2012?
There was a negative 12% change in inventories.
So inventory drops, okay.
But I guess.
And did our sales drop? By how much did our sales drop?
Let me go to revenue.
It was only in 2010 to 2011. It was
So,
super
yeah,
high.
2010 to 2011, there was a negative 1% change in sales, and then 2011 to 2012, it was a 0.5%.
Okay, so our inventory's way down. We're gonna have to use a lot of cash to get that back up.
And is that, well, I would argue that that would be based on European franchise managers don't have confidence in being able to sell more inventory.
So that's right. But you gotta be really careful with the story you're telling, because you're gonna come back and say, yeah, Europe's really scary. We're really concerned about this, but their offer's way too low.
Unless we change our growth rate.
Yeah, I mean, you can, like I said, everything's still in flux. The narrative is critical, right? I don't care what numbers you have, if your narrative doesn't work with it. And keep in the back of your mind, valuation is part math and it's part storytelling, but on the math side, I can get you any number you want. Right? It may not jive with the story, it may not be real, but mathematically, I can get any number you want, almost any number in the universe, by just throwing numbers in there. So you gotta make those two jive. And I think you've got a really, really good story about Europe and how concerning, the concerns with Europe right now. So make sure that jives with your ultimate conclusion.
Jeff, when a dealership buys inventory unit, They're financing it largely through the manufacturer. What percentage of the cost of the unit are they financing?
You know, I don't know exactly, I think it's about 80 or 90%. It may be 100%, but then they've got, if they don't sell the inventory within a certain number of days, they have
They
to
start
start paying.
cash
it down.
flow and the interest, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when
No,
I,
and the principal, I think they gotta start paying it down.
when I had some exposure to this, which is a long time ago, and I doubt that these norms still exist, it was virtually 100%. But it was in a marketplace in which the manufacturers were still wanting to motivate dealerships. That's not as present now.
Even in 2012, it wouldn't be as present.
Well, I think the dealership networks were pretty well established, and we didn't have an awful lot of growth in the economy, so there wouldn't have been a lot of motivation for new ones. They were just trying to keep the ones they had afloat. So they'd be more inclined to float as much of the cost as possible. Make the transaction more fluid. Okay. One or two other things? We're going to have to wrap it.
I think I've gone through my comments.
The only other thing I want to point out to you is you start by telling us that it's 2012. You don't have to keep telling us it's 2012. We believed you the first time. You say it like 3 or 4 times. So it's 2012. Because you don't go around telling me every day that it's 2019. You know that I know that. Okay.
And these guys will get that.
Yeah.
Right, it's a weird concept, it's probably a weird concept for you guys to be thinking about, because when you guys are doing valuations, it's today. I do valuations in the past all the time. The furthest back I've had to go was 1991. And I did that valuation
Wow.
in about 2015.
Well, and they're used to having to do them in the past as well, but not that far back.
Yeah, that was a fun litigation.
I'll
case.
bet. Okay, you guys made some great progress, honestly. You got a couple of things you want to do because